So in this video, we're going to look at another example of consumer and producer surplus. So here's our demand curve, here's our supply curve. Find the equilibrium price and quantity. You can use your calculator to do this. Sketch D of X and S of X and shade the consumers and the producer surplus regions. Okay, so in my calculator to graph them, you go to Y equals, if you have anything in there, clear it. And you're going to type in the 20 minus the 0.05x for your demand into Y1. And in Y2, I'm going to type in 2 plus 0.002 x squared. And then I'm going to go to window. And this value here again is the y-intercept. It's where it crosses the y-axis, which means I know my y max, that's how far it goes up on the y-axis, has to be bigger than 20. So I'm going to change that to 25. It also matches like my graph here. And I don't really know anything about the x values, so I'm just going to hit graph and see if I can see where they intersect. And obviously I can't, like they're going to intersect somewhere over here, but it's way past 10. So I'm going to go to window again. And because I need to move my graph to the right, I need to change my X max. Again, with consumer and demand surplus, we're only interested in the first quadrant. So you can always start your X min at 0. And I don't know where they intersect. I'm just going to guess. Let's say I try 50 for my X max and graph and see, and I still can't see where they intersect. So I'm going to go to window and I'm going to make it the X max even bigger. So let's just go 200. And now I can see them. And that's the key thing. I need to see where they intersect. And then I'm going to hit second calc. You go down to number 5 and hit enter. Move your cursor to where they intersect, and then you have to hit enter 3 times till it says intersection. So it's going to say first curve, hit enter, second curve, hit enter, guess, hit enter, and then it should say intersection, and that's your final answer. On the exam, and I think on the homework, I am going to say to round to 2 decimal places. Okay, so my intersection point is going to be that 83.19 and 15.84. Okay, so this is my equilibrium point. And remember, we call this Q star and this P star. Okay, so I have to do kind of rough sketches with this. The main thing that matters when you graph these is kind of where they start, and then the intersection point. The other points don't have to be exact. So again, what you could do is you can go to second table, and if you have your table, sorry, let me go to second table set. If you change your second table set back to auto and just make sure that your table starts around 0 or before 0, and you go to second table, it's going to list the X values and then the Y values for both curves. So if you go down to 0, you can see that your demand curve, which we put in 1, starts at 20, and your supply curve starts at 2. And then again, we want the equilibrium point. So I'm just going to graph for my demand curve 0, 20, and then I'm going to plot the equilibrium as best I can. So it's 83.19 and 15.84. Okay, so halfway there's 12 tick marks. So kind of halfway between there, which is here, would be 75. And you don't have to be really specific. And these all go up by 5. So this would be 80, 85. So it's going to fall somewhere between these 2 tick marks. And then we have 15 here. And it's 15.84. So again, 85 is here. So I'm going to go a little bit before that point and a little bit above 15. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure you label it. And as we saw when I graphed it, this is a line. So I'm going to connect these 2 points with a line. And then we said for our supply curve, okay, we have 0, 2, and again, the same intersection point. And again, if we look at our graph, this is a parabola. It's a little curve. So I'm going to plot 0, 2, which is going to be like around here. Let me do a different color. And it goes to this point, and so I'm going to draw that curve for my demand curve. Okay, now for my supply curve. You should label both of these. So label it as S of X and D of X. Make sure you label your intersection point. And again, the main points I would just have is what's on the y-axis and then where they intersect. And then we also want to draw in that rectangle, because you are going to have to shade the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. So the rectangle has a height of where this point is and then a width of where that point is. And the consumer surplus is here. Okay, so it's the area between the demand curve and your rectangle. And then the producer surplus is here. Okay, and I know most of you do black and white when you scan. So just like use different notation for shading them and just make sure to clearly label it. So I could, if I don't have different colors for this producer surplus, just do like maybe lines up and down. And then the consumer surplus, do lines left and right, something like that to indicate that they're different if you don't have different colors. Okay, so we found our graph, we shaded our regions, and then that's all this question asks for. But I am going to do the consumer surplus and the producer surplus because you are going to have to do that on the exam as well as the homework. Okay, so the consumer surplus, again, is the integral from 0 to Q star, and I just keep writing the formula so that it helps you to remember it, of your demand function, and then put your dx minus the area of the rectangle, which you get by the equilibrium point, multiplying the x and the y value together. So our consumer surplus is going to be 0, 2. Our Q star is the x value of the equilibrium point. Again, we're going to do 2 decimal places, so 83.19. I'm going to put the demand function, which is 20 minus 0.05x. Make sure you put your dx here, minus, and then I'm going to do my p times q, which is 83.19 times the q. Let's go up to our equilibrium point, which is 15.84. And like I said, if the subtraction with this, and then when you do the fundamental theorem, the 0 is going to confuse you. Maybe like write this out and then just do the integral separately on the side and show all your work for it, and then come back to the formula. So this would be 20x minus 0.05 x squared over 2. Again, we don't need plus c because it's a definite integral. Okay, and again, I'm going to do 0.05 divided by 2, which is 0.025. Okay. And then for this, we plug in our upper bound first. Minus, and then our lower bound. And again, with the lower bound, make sure you put that in parentheses. Okay, so again, this, if I'm plugging in 0, and as long as every term has a 0, this ends up just being minus 0. And then I'm just going to type all of the rest of it into my calculator. I get 1490.79. Again, I'm going to just stick with 2 decimal places, and then it would be minus 0. So this integral part is that 1490.78. Sorry, 79. Okay, so then once I do that, because I did it on the side, I'm going to go back to my consumer surplus formula. Don't forget to do that. And our consumer surplus now is going to be this 1490.79, because that's what we found this integral to be, minus the 83.19 times the 15.84. Okay, so again, 2 decimal places is 7.3. And then if I subtract them, I get $173.06. So that would be my consumer surplus. Okay, so again, if you do the integral on the side, just make sure then that you can clearly label that you're going back to your consumer surplus by writing out consumer surplus or CS when you're solving it. Okay, so then we need to do the producer surplus. I'm just going to do that on the next page since I have so much on this page. Okay, so this is my demand and my supply. That was my equilibrium point. That's the main things I need for the producer surplus. Okay, so I'm going to write PS. Again, the formula is for this one, you take the rectangle first, and then you subtract out the integral from 0 to Q star of your supply curve. Just as a reminder, the producer surplus is this region here. So the top curve is the rectangle. So the outside region is the rectangle, and then this one here, the bottom curve that we're subtracting, is our S of X, our supply curve. Okay. So again, we have 83.19 times 15.84 minus the integral from 0 to 83.19. And then my supply curve, which is 2 plus 0.002 x squared dx. Okay, so 83.19 times that 15.84 again is the 1317.73. And then I also need to calculate this integral. And again, on the exam, you have to do it by hand. So I'm going to do this kind of on the side and then come back to my producer surplus formula. Okay, so the antiderivative of 2 is 2x. The antiderivative of 0.002, it's going to be x cubed over 3. And I'm going to divide the 0.002 by 3. Actually, I'm not, because it gives me a really long decimal that's in scientific notation. So I'm just going to leave it like this so I have a more exact answer. Okay, so then I'm going to plug in my upper bound. Minus my lower bound. Okay, and again for this one, the lower bound just ends up, sorry, this should not be over everything, should just ends up being 0 because I have 0 in every term, so I don't really need that part. But then I'm going to do 2 times 83.19 minus the 0.002 times 83.19 cubed over 3. And sorry, I changed this from a minus to a plus. So this should be plus to match up the sign. Sorry about that. So I have 2 times 83.19 plus 0.002 times 83.19 cubed over 3. And that's what, and then I get 550.20. If I round to 2 decimal places, it's like 550.195. And then I'm going to go back to my producer surplus formula and plug that in for my integral. So we had 1317.73 minus, again, it was this integral. And so it's 1317.73 minus 550.20. And if I subtract that, I get my final answer for my surplus, or my producer surplus, which is 767.53. So that's how you do the consumer and the producer surplus. Again, for these problems, you don't have to find the equilibrium point by hand. I mean, you can set them equal and then you'd have to do quadratic formula. But you can just use your calculator for these. So if you have any questions, let me know.